Members, good afternoon. It's the appointed time, and we have a quorum. For the Year of the Snake, this is the first meeting of the panel. I wish for peace in both Hong Kong and the mainland, and I wish you all a prosperous Year of the Snake. Since the meeting on 3rd of December 2024, the Secretariat issued 2 information papers. One being a joint letter dated 13th of January of this year from Mr. Dennis LEUNG and Mr. TANG Ka-piu suggesting the panel's discussion on issues relating to the administration's follow-up work on cases in which Hong Kong residents were suspected of being lured to Southeast Asian countries and being detained. LC paper number CB-297/2025/01, and the administration's reply, that is LC paper number CB-2166/2025/01. The Deputy Chairman and I met with the Secretary for Security to formulate the work plan for this session. We will discuss this particular item as decided during the meeting at the special meeting next Tuesday on the 11th of February when we discuss the item of law and order situation in 2024. So we will discuss this joint letter as well as the administration's reply at the special meeting. The administration believes since we are going to have the meeting on law and order situation, we will discuss this particular item on that day. Mr. TANG Ka-piu, yes. First of all, I wish you a prosperous Year of the Snake. I thank the Deputy Chairman and the Chairman making it happen so that we can discuss this within this month. And in fact, the legal sector has some views on this, on how to handle the issues. I hope the administration can respond to their views as well during the meeting. Thank you. I believe the administration's reply said that they would rely on multiple pieces of legislation, but it may not be specific legislation that we will be discussing. But your views are noted. We will convey your views to the administration, and I believe they will provide any updated replies if necessary at the special meeting. I also note that Mr. Dominic Lee also expressed concerns for the topic. And when we had our meeting on the 14th of January, Mr. Dominic Lee expressed concerns on the issue. And in fact, many members of the panel would be concerned about this issue. And in December of last year, we discussed a subject that is relevant on how to provide assistance to residents in distress outside of Hong Kong. Moving on, items for discussion at the next meeting. So we have the list of outstanding items for discussion, LC paper number CB-2167/2025/01. We also have the list of follow-up actions. That is LC paper number CB-2167/2025/02. These have been sent to members for reference. The list of outstanding items for discussion has incorporated members' suggested items as well as the schedule that they are to be discussed. Please refer to the list for details. We are going to have some items consolidated for discussion. Apart from the item for following up and responding to cases in which Hong Kong residents were suspected of being lured to Southeast Asian countries and detained, that is the second item on the list. We will also discuss some other items at the special meeting when we discuss the law and order situation of 2024. We are going to discuss also item 3 on the outstanding list of outstanding items for discussion, combating banking activities in public places, as well as item 4, latest situation on the work of preventing and combating online frauds, as well as item 5, aviation security and counterterrorism work upon commissioning of the 3-runway system at Hong Kong International Airport. So these will all be discussed at the special meeting. Any views from members on the arrangements? If not, we will discuss these items at the special meeting on 11th of February. As for the regular meeting that is to take place in March, as we have the 2 sessions in March, so we will have our regular meeting in March held on 17th of March, Monday, between 10:45 in the morning and 12:45 p.m. The Security Bureau proposes to discuss the 2 following items, and these items are also included in the list of outstanding items for discussion. That is, item 6, proposed amendments to the Prison Rules, Chapter 234A, and the Post-Release Supervision of Prisoners Regulation, Chapter 475A. This is a legislative proposal. We will also discuss item 7 on the list, construction of fire station cum ambulance depot with departmental quarters and facilities of the Fire Services Department at the Anderson Road Quarry site, Sai Kung. This is a public works proposal. The ICAC proposes to discuss an item at the meeting also. That is item number 8, proposed retention of 1 supernumerary post of assistant director in the ICAC. This is an establishment proposal. So I am suggesting that we will we will extend the meeting to end at 1 o'clock instead of 12:45 because we have 3 items that are proposed to be discussed. If there are no objections, that's what we'll do. All right. Let's move on to the next agenda item. Before we actually go into the discussion of the item, let's invite representatives of the administration to come inside. The item we are to discuss is implementation of the protocol against the illicit manufacturing of and trafficking in firearms, their parts and components and ammunition, supplementing the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. In short, the Firearms Protocol. I welcome the Secretary for Security and his team. I wish you all a prosperous year of the snake. I hope that you will continue to do good work this year. And I wish you all good health and a prosperous year of the snake. When you're ready, please. Thank you. That is the 7th day of the Lunar New Year. I wish you all a happy birthday and a prosperous year of the snake. Today we are to discuss the proposed amendments to the Firearms Protocol. We are trying to implement the Firearms Protocol in Hong Kong, and that will improve the regulation of firearms, including the component parts or ammunition. In Hong Kong, a stringent regulatory framework for arms ammunition has been put in place under the ordinance, that is Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, Chapter 238. It is an offense to possess or deal in any firearms or ammunition without a license. The fine is level 6 fine and the imprisonment term is 10 years. And we have all along been enforcing the legislation strictly. We have adopted a multi-pronged approach to combat any illicit dealing with firearms or ammunition. The police has been doing good work, as well as the Customs and Excise Department has also been conducting patrols and inspections of cargoes to prevent illicit trafficking of firearms or ammunition. There will also be joint operations to pursue those who illegally possess and deal in firearms. We have communicated closely with mainland and overseas law enforcement agencies to intercept illegal firearms into Hong Kong. The Firearms Protocol came into effect in 2005. It is an important legal document in the field of international regulation of conventional weapons. This is a legal document to prevent and combat illicit distribution of firearms and ammunition. In December 2023, the Firearms Protocol was ratified by the Central People's Government and has been applicable to the PRC with effect from 18th of January 2024. It is an important initiative of the Central People's Government to implement the Global Security Initiative, practice multilateralism, and safeguard international and regional peace and stability. In order to tie in with national policy, we are obliged to review local legislation to ensure we can fully implement the Firearms Protocol. Having reviewed the local legislation, we propose to amend the following items. 1. We will establish illicit manufacturing as an offense. Article 5 of the protocol requires that illicit manufacturing of firearms, including their component parts or ammunition, to be a criminal offense. And under the existing regulatory framework, we already have some sort of legislation against people who possesses or by way of trade or business deals in firearms unless they are granted a license for possession or a dealer's license. Basically, one has to be licensed and one has to be dealing in firearms by way of trade or business. Otherwise, one will be committing an offense. The maximum penalty is a fine at level 6 and imprisonment for 10 years. We have seen the legislation working effectively, but in order to better implement the requirements of the protocol, we propose making amendments to the ordinance to establish the illicit manufacturing to be a separate offense, so as to state more clearly the criminal liability, so that no person should manufacture firearms or ammunition unless they are doing it by way of trade or business or holds a dealer's license. As this may be a national security threat, we will enhance the prison term to 20 years instead of just 10 years. We will also have illicit trafficking in firearms or ammunition to be a separate offense. Article 5 of the protocol requires the establishment of such to be a criminal offense, and the relevant acts would include importing, exporting, acquiring, selling, delivering, moving, or transferring of firearms from or across the territory of one state party to that of another state party without authorization. Right now, we do not establish illicit trafficking in firearms or ammunition as a separate offense. Enforcement authorities have to therefore resort to the offenses of possession of or dealing in firearms or ammunition without license in taking law enforcement actions. Therefore, we propose amending the ordinance by establishing the aforementioned acts of illicit trafficking as a separate offense to implement the requirements of the protocol more accurately, and we will again impose a prison term of 20 years. Thirdly, we will impose some requirements on the marking of firearms. This is in response to what is said in Article 8 of the protocol. Right now, the Commissioner of Police Administrative requires the applicants of a license for possession or a dealer's license in respect of firearms and ammunition to provide information on the firearms or ammunition concerned. Otherwise, there are no marking requirements. Therefore, we propose to impose requirements by way of legislation to make sure some marking is included, including the name of the manufacturer, the country of manufacture, as well as the serial number. We will also make sure that there is the country of import and the year of import be marked on imported firearms. There will be an imprisonment term of 2 years if they do not comply with such requirements. This will also be a criminal offense. and we will propose amendments in terms of such requirements as well as the penalties. We plan to introduce the bill in April 2025, and we urge members to support the proposed amendments. We are now more than willing to take questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. As this item involves legislative proposal, we have invited all LegCo members, including those that are not a part of the panel, to join the discussion. I see that there are 8 members who have pressed the button indicating their wish to speak. I'll read out the names. I'll allow each member 4 minutes. First, Mr. Johnny Ng, Mr. Chow Man-kong, Mr. Yang Wen-kit, Mr. Benson Leuk, Mr. Dominic Lee, Mr. Chang Hak-kun, Mr. Holden Chow, and Mr. Ma Feng-kwok. Mr. Johnny Ng. Thank you. Thank you. Happy Lunar New Year. I speak in support of the proposed amendments to the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance to strengthen control over firearms and ammunition to fight against organized crime and terrorism. The SAR government have been trying to combat the sale and purchase of firearms to safeguard the safety of the society. I'd like to ask about some figures. Over the past 5 years, I'd like to know how many cases involve the sale and purchase of firearms and ammunition, as well as the components parts. I wonder where these firearms and ammunitions, as well as components parts, come from, or where were they sold? How is the administration going to intercept the import of these firearms and ammunitions, and how are you going to step up intelligence exchange with other places? Second, we have now AI, 3D printing, a lot of advanced technology these days. It's easy for criminals to print firearms or the component parts. Is there a way for you to collect intelligence in order to combat such crime? Thank you. Secretary for Security. Thank you. Let me give you the figures. Over the past 5 years, we have detected 12 cases where firearms were uncovered. 31 such firearms were uncovered from these cases. As for the manufacturing of firearms, over the past 5 years, we have discovered 2 of such cases, but these 2 cases did not involve real firearms. On the trafficking of firearms, over the past 5 years, there were 3 of such cases. Most of these firearms were imported from Europe. They were imported to Hong Kong via mail. The CNED have done much in order to intercept the import of such firearms and component parts. We have made use of big data and artificial intelligence to focus our investigation over some target areas. So apart from random sampling, we adopt a risk-based approach when we sample imported items at the border. As for 3D printing as a type of technology, if real firearms are manufactured because of 3D printing, then the manufacturer would have violated the firearms protocol. But some people may try to manufacture air gun using 3D printing, and the manufacturer of such air gun would have violated the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance. Mr. Chow Man-kong, thank you. I have a question for the Secretary. Under the firearm protocol, there is a definition of manufacture. Is alteration a form of manufacturing? There are air guns that could not cause serious harms, but after certain alteration to the air gun, it can cause harm. Would that constitute manufacturing a firearm? In Singapore, for the illegal sale of a firearm, only if 10 of such firearms are involved, would that constitute an offense of trafficking. On combating illicit trafficking of firearms and ammunition, I know that SE and ED plays a role in it. How are you going to step up international collaboration in order to combat illicit import and export of firearms? CNED is the deputy chairman of an international organization. How are you going to enhance your efforts in this area? Thank you for your question. Under the firearm protocol, manufacturing include assembly and alteration. For manufacturing of real firearms, in order to combat underground trading of such firearms being manufactured, we ask the manufacturer to obtain licenses. As for alteration of air guns in order to turn them into real firearms, that's not something that is under control in the firearm protocol. But under the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, there is an offense on alteration of air guns into real firearms. So there are ways for us to cope with such situation. You mentioned that in Singapore, only manufacturing of 10 firearms would constitute an offense. But in Hong Kong, if you manufacture a single firearm, then you would have broken the law. On the point about CNED and its collaboration with international parties, as Mr. Chow mentioned, we are the deputy president of the World Customs Organizations. We will offer some courses on illicit trafficking of firearms or ammunition in the future. We also have an intelligence network. On top of training, we do have an intelligence network so that we can be made aware of where the firearms come from. Under the police, we also have an intelligence network with the International Police Organization. We have a 24-hour intelligence exchange mechanism. That's how we try to intercept the import of firearms and ammunition. Thank you. Next, Mr. Yang Ming-kit, Deputy Chairman. Thank you. I speak in support of the implementation of the firearms protocol. The administration proposed to put in place requirements on the markings of firearms. I wonder how we can enhance the efficiency of enforcement in this area, and how do we verify the validity or the truthfulness of these markings. I know that there will only be one set of marking on each ammunition or firearm. How do we check the markings? What if someone used the same marking on multiple firearms or ammunition? How can we prevent such from happening? Will we mandate people to put markings on old or existing firearms that have been imported? Thank you. Let me talk about the marking of the firearms. According to the protocol, the location of the markings are set out in it, and there should be a marking on the body of the gun, the name of the manufacturer, the country of manufacture, the year of import, year of manufacture, and the country of import, as well as the serial numbers should be marked on the firearms. If we discover, we can verify the markings on our firearm with the manufacturer of that particular firearm. The body of a gun or firearm is very hard. It's difficult for anyone to make markings on it. It's not that easy. It may be possible for someone to carve markings on it. But for firearms that were normally manufactured and were sold in underground, we will be able to trace where the firearm come from, and we would be able to figure out why the firearm was sold illegally. The ordinance or the amended ordinance are here to regulate newly imported or manufactured firearms. So for existing firearms or ammunition, we don't regulate it under the ordinance because it's difficult for us to figure out when it was imported or where it was imported from. Thank you. Next, Mr. Benson Look. Thank you, Madam Chair. In the paper, it is said that our country has ratified the Firearms Protocol in December 2023 in order to safeguard people's lives. I support the proposed amendments. I have 3 points of concern. First, one of the focus of the amendment is to combat illicit manufacturing and trafficking of firearms or ammunition, as well as its assembly of firearms. I noticed that under the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, there are a few definitions to firearms and ammunition. It includes firearms as well as air guns, electric guns, and other guns. Can you let us know what type of guns or firearms we are regulating? Are we talking about metal pistol? As a member have mentioned, the technology is very advanced these days. There are different ways for us to assemble firearms. We can use 3D printing and other technology to manufacture guns. We saw such firearms in the Black Hat violence. With such types of weapons be regulated under the ordinance, I noticed that in the paper it is said that the CNED adopt a risk-based approach, and the secretary said that we exchange intelligence with different agencies. For firearms and ammunition that were imported via mail, how are we going to cope with that? For organized crime, intelligence exchange may be useful, but for individuals who act on their own, how are we going to combat their illegal acts of import? Thank you. Please explain about the firearms and ammunition as well as their definition. Well, under the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, it's true that the definition of arms cover air rifle, air gun, air pistol, and those with a muscle energy greater than 2 joules. But the Firearms Protocol focuses on real firearms that are discharged by genuine gunpowder. The purpose of the firearm protocol is to prevent real firearms or genuine firearms from entering the underground market. As well, for the definition of manufacturing under the firearms protocol, it actually includes manufacture and assembly of firearms from component parts illegally trafficked. On the import of firearms via mail, we adopt a risk-based and intelligence-based approach, and we use big data, AI. We conduct online patrol. We also browse and check gun websites to see if there is any suspicious trafficking of firearms.
Tang, please.
All right, Mr. Dominic Lee. We have seen in recent years some illicit manufacturing and trafficking of firearms and components and ammunition. I therefore thank the Security Bureau for taking the lead in proposing amendments to improve regulation. I believe that will help with regulation in Hong Kong of firearms. I have some questions. Right now, you're proposing amendments to have illicit manufacturing established as a criminal offense. But right now, we do see people trying to import the different parts separately, and then they will assemble the parts. So what is the trend right now? Is it getting more serious? Will you enhance inspection on the parts of firearms being imported into Hong Kong? And we have seen content online telling people how to manufacture firearms. Is such content illegal in Hong Kong? If it is, how can we regulate such online content to prevent the spreading of such dangerous information? Thank you. Secretary, thank you. We will talk about the definition of manufacturing. So manufacturing would include also assembly of firearms. So this would include what the member said about assembly of firearms from component parts illicitly trafficked. So this is a criminal offense. And we have defined component parts to be a part of firearms in the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, so that will be illegal too, importing such parts. We have adopted an intelligence-led approach. The CNED will take the lead and make use of technology, adopting a risk-based approach when conducting inspections. For the high-risk sources, say particular shops, we will check all such cargoes coming from such sources. As for online content, having people teach other people how to assemble firearms, this will be seen as aiding and abetting. So this is also illegal. But of course, it would depend on the circumstances. If it indeed constitutes aiding and abetting, that will be an offense. I have some follow-up questions. If one is teaching how to manufacture firearms, it may be legal in the jurisdiction of the one teaching people how to do it. But in Hong Kong, we still have ways to access such content. Maybe it's online through a website or social media. Would you require the hosting companies, if they have operations in Hong Kong, of course, or some social media platform to make sure we can control access to such content from Hong Kong? Secretary, indeed, in some jurisdictions, it is legal. For example, in certain states in the US, it is legal for gun parts to be in circulation, but when it is imported in Hong Kong, it is illegal. If the content is hosted in jurisdictions where such content is legal, we cannot really prevent access to such information, but we can probably ask telco companies to prevent access of such content from Hong Kong. Thank you. Mr. Chan Ha-kun. Chair, We have seen in the past year or so, we have multiple incidents of illicit manufacturing, especially in cases of black-clad violence. We have seen some people secretly manufacturing firearms at their own homes with 3D printers. I think there's a need to amend legislation, of course, in relation to this, to better regulate the firearms. And in fact, from 18th of January 2024, the firearms protocol was already made applicable in the PRC. It seems that we are lagging behind, so we really should catch up with lost time. I want to ask about the definition of manufacturing. The Secretary talked about there is other legislation for imitation firearms. But if someone is modifying some marked genuine firearms, for example, we have some gun associations that already have their guns registered, and someone is modifying such guns for illegal purposes. How is it considered illegal? What legislation are we relying on? And we also have to make sure there is awareness from the gun association members so that they won't be breaching the law inadvertently. We also talked about how the 3D printing technology makes it easy for people to manufacture firearms or the components. They can do it in just, say, any industrial buildings. So how can we prevent people from abusing the 3D printing technology to breach the law? These are my questions. Thank you, Secretary. I would like to first respond to the first question. Some have genuine firearms, or some have modified imitation firearms with the more damaging components. So we first have to ask where these components come from. If the components are illegally imported, that would already be illegal. Right now, we do not have an authorized gun dealer in Hong Kong, so anyone possessing such parts would already be considered illegal, not to mention the actual firearm. As for people secretly manufacturing components or firearms, we have taken the approach of conducting cyber patrols. We will go to websites or content that would talk about manufacturing guns to make sure such content is legal in Hong Kong. And we also rely on intelligence provided by citizens, and we urge citizens to report any suspicious circumstances. What was your third question again? Oh, I wanted to ask about the legislative progress, because it has been some time since the initiative has been implemented in the PRC. Well, we hope to complete the legislative process this year. That's it for my answer. Thank you. Mr. Holden Chow. I believe the proposed amendments are in order because the firearms protocol has been effective for quite some time. And this indeed is an international security threat. There is a need for us to make sure we are protecting the safety of all. From the proposed amendments, I see that there is a need to collect much more intelligence to make sure we are enforcing the laws effectively. We have also observed people, instead of importing the whole firearm, they would just import parts and they will assemble the parts themselves. So this is what we have observed, and we do anticipate such cases in future still. And I can see in paragraph 14, we may see circumstances where people would modify the markings on firearms or even falsify the markings. So I want to ask the administration in other jurisdictions, is this common? Since they are already trying to make it less conspicuous that they are importing parts instead, would they adopt the approach of modifying the markings or altering the markings or falsifying the markings? Is this common in trying to circumvent the requirements? Thank you. Secretary, I very much agree that we should enhance our intelligence gathering, especially on importing parts, and this is already illegal. So for cargoes or mail being posted to Hong Kong, we have been stepping up inspections to not only look for firearms, but we also are looking for parts as well in the X-ray inspections. We have enhanced the use of technologies to identify such parts. As for markings, in other jurisdictions, it is not common to falsify or alter the markings because it is not exactly easy to do so. But we have seen people trying to scratch the original markings so that people don't know the source of the firearm. Thank you. Mr. Ma Fung Kwok. Thank you, Chair. I support the proposed amendments in response to the implementation of the protocol so as to prevent illicit firearms from circulating. I have a question. We have 3D printing, of course. In Australia, apparently it is made illegal to even possess a blueprint for manufacturing parts or the firearms because it would facilitate people printing such parts or firearms. So can we make possession of these digital prints illegal so that people can't manufacture such parts or firearms with 3D printers in the first place in Hong Kong? We have seen in Mongkok or other places in Hong Kong, they have specific army goods stores that would sell air guns. And people can buy other parts to modify the air guns. This is legal right now. Will this be made illegal with the proposed amendments? What parts will be seen as illicit firearm components? When is it distinguished? When is it identified as imitation firearms? We also have prop guns in dramas when they're filming dramas, and these are basically modified firearms that can't have bullet shot. But then I guess some effects may have to be made with some components retained in order to achieve the effect of somewhat shooting the gun. Of course, those who are dealing with such props would have the relevant licenses, but they still may have to modify the guns. Under the proposed amendments, will these acts be regulated? Will these acts be seen as illegal? Can the administration explain the situation? Thank you.
Secretary, 3 questions. First, on possession of digital blueprint of firearms. In Australia, this is illegal, but it only constitutes an offense when someone owns the blueprint with the intent to manufacture. For Hong Kong, if you have the intention to manufacture firearms while possessing any blueprint of manufacturing, then you would have committed an offense. For shops selling army goods in Hong Kong, they mostly sell air guns instead of arms with gunpowder. They mostly sell air guns. No genuine firearms are involved in these stores. The amended ordinance only regulate genuine firearms, so these shops will not be affected. On the impact caused to the entertainment or film industry, well, most of the filmmakers who use firearms in their movies possesses a license, so the amendment will not cause any impact to the industry. Next, Ms. Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the proposed amendments to the ordinance. Since the Black Cloud violence in 2019, we've been seeing criminals and people who advocate for Hong Kong's independence trying to manufacture firearms or weapons. We have collected intelligence on people who try to create explosives. We saw a few years ago young people trying to manufacture bombs or firearms at their own residences. So I think that the amendment to the ordinance would help combat manufacturing or trafficking of firearms and ammunition. It's not as difficult to manufacture arms. There are a lot of people teaching you how to manufacture guns and arms on the internet. Although the amendments to the ordinance may be effective to a certain extent, the administration must step up education and promotion such that young people in Hong Kong know that they should not try to print arms using 3D printing and thinking that is no big deal. So I think that education and promotion is very important. I was going to ask about 3D printing, but a lot of members have put similar questions. So I'd like to ask how the administration will step up education and promotion such that young people know that manufacturing of firearms is a serious offense. Secretary, thank you. While we try to amend the ordinance, we will put in place a series of promotional campaigns. Apart from issuing leaflets or distributing pamphlets, we'll also post the messages on social media, and we'll also educate the industry and trade. We have a close communication with the industry to make sure that they are aware of the new requirements and regulations. As you mentioned, a lot of young people try to learn how to manufacture firearms on the internet. We'll try to promote the right message and our regulation on the manufacturing of firearms on the internet and on these platforms. Now it's my turn. I have 3 questions, and they are rather technical. First, about the firearms protocol. Our country ratified it on the 19th of December 2023 and is applicable to the PRC, including Hong Kong, from 18th of January 2024. In Macau, SAR, they apply the protocol to their city by publishing a notice on their gazette. I wonder how we are going to make it applicable to Hong Kong. Also, according to the firearm protocol, it is said that acts of trafficking include the import, export, acquisition, sale, delivery, movement, or transfer of firearms from or across the territory of one state party to another. What if a firearms is imported from Taiwan or Macau? Would that constitute acts of trafficking? Third, under paragraphs 10 and 11, no penalty was mentioned. So what is the proposed penalty level for illegal trafficking in firearms or ammunition? Secretary, thank you. We think that it's more proper for us to legislate for the amendments to the ordinance in order to apply the protocol in Hong Kong. We want to improve the ordinance based on the firearms protocol. And we think that this is the most proper way to, for us to take forward the implementation because we already have a firearms and ammunition ordinance. Second, on the definition of state party or territory, we can understand it as a jurisdiction. What is the third question? On the penalty of illicit trafficking in firearms or ammunition. As I mentioned, the maximum penalty is 20 years of imprisonment for illicit trafficking in firearms or ammunition. Currently, it's 14 years. But we think that as the offense is so serious, we need to increase the penalty. So the penalty for illicit manufacturing and trafficking are both 20 years of imprisonment. Is that right? Yes. I don't have any further questions. Any members would like to speak for the second round? If not, that concludes our item 3. Thank you. The next item is Registered Fire Engineer Scheme. Let's invite the government officials to enter the room. As this item involves legislative proposal, so all LegCo members are welcome to join the discussion. The Secretariat has prepared a background brief on this item. That is LC paper CB bracket 2167/25 bracket 05. This is for members' reference. Welcome, Mr. Michael Chuck, Undersecretary for Security, and his team. Please brief us on LC paper number CB bracket 2167/25 bracket 04. Members, if you'd like to speak on this item, please press the button now. Undersecretary, are you ready? If you are, please brief us of the paper. Thank you. Madam Chair, I'm here to brief members on the proposed implementation details of the Registered Fire Engineer Scheme, RFE scheme. Fire Services Department now is the only institution who can issue a certificate or letter of fire safety to the trade. In order to leverage on the market forces and qualified persons, we're proposing a registered fire engineer scheme so that registered fire engineers will be allowed to provide fire safety risk assessment and certification services for applicants for licenses of certain premises. Under the scheme, qualified persons can apply to become a registered fire engineers from the Fire Services Department. And there will be 3 classes of such engineer. They will be responsible for risk assessment, fire service installation inspection, and ventilating system inspection to see if they comply with the fire safety requirements. We need to legislate for the scheme, and the government has been carrying out the legislative work in progress. In March 2017, the Fire Service Amendment Ordinance was passed by the LegCo to provide basis for making of subsidiary legislation for the scheme. We are taking forward various legislative processes in parallel, including making 2 new regulations, setting out the details of the registered fire engineers and fire engineers registration fees. We will also make relevant amendments to other pieces of legislation, including the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance. One of the important consideration of implementing the scheme is that the public safety will not be undermined. That's why we'll put in place a stringent monitoring mechanism. We will have a set of stringent eligibility criteria to make sure that only those who possess relevant professional qualifications, academic qualifications, and work experience can discharge the duties. The applicant may seek registration as an engineer through one of the following routes. He or she should either be registered professional engineer in discipline relevant to fire safety risk assessment and have 1 year of relevant working experience, or he or she should hold a bachelor or higher degree relating to the duties and have 6 years of relevant experience, or one should be a practitioner with at least 15 years of experience and have completed the recognized professional courses. FSD will establish a registration committee to set out the detailed qualification criteria and advise the Director of Fire Services on the operation of the scheme. The committee will propose professional courses that will be recognized. We will also establish an interview board. We will conduct a professional interview with applicants. The DFS will also issue code of practice and guidelines to registered fire engineers in order to provide practical guidelines on risk assessment. On the other hand, rules of conduct to be observed and acts that could be subject to disciplinary offenses will also be listed in the code. The fire engineers are required to comply with the codes and guidelines. In order to make sure that the standards are consistent, all the fire safety requirements proposed by the RFE must be submitted and approved by the Fire Services Department. To ensure the quality of the inspection conducted by the RFE, the FSD will conduct audit inspection on 70% of the premises licensed by the fire engineers. We'll also set up a disciplinary mechanism. Licensed premises will be subject to the mechanism, and we will take forward the scheme in phases. We will start with food businesses that are regulated under the food business regulation in the first phase. We will review the operation of the scheme after some time to see if we should extend it to other trades. We will also amend other relevant pieces of legislation. As I mentioned, the goal of introducing the scheme is to allow licensed applicants one more option, and this is to facilitate the trade. In other words, licensed applicants can still opt for services provided by the Fire Services Department. We have passed the Fire Services Amendment Ordinance that have laid the important foundation for the legislative work in respect of the scheme. The FSD have consulted relevant professional bodies and trade associations about the proposed details and code of practice. The trade in general support the amendments and the relevant proposal. We're pressing ahead with the legislative work, and we target to introduce the regulation into the LEUNG in the first half of 2025. Apart from FER fees regulations and RFE regulation that will be subject to negative vetting, will also arrange for relevant parts to come in of the Fire Services Amendment Ordinance to come into operation by positive vetting. This scheme is a win-win plan, and I hope that members will support the scheme so that we can implement it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. I want to first ask something. You mentioned 2 pieces of regulation. So you have one that is for positive vetting, that is the Fire Services Registered Fire Engineers Regulation. For the fees regulation, it will be subject to negative vetting, correct? Correct, thank you. Thank you. We have 9 members who have pressed the request to speak button. I'll read out the order in which members are going to speak. Mr. Benson Luke, Professor Chow Man Kong, Mr. Holden Chow, Mr. Yang Wing Kip, Mr. Chen Pui Leung, Dr. Johnny Dr. Lo Wai Kwok, Mr. Martin Liao, and myself, I will assign a 4-minute time limit. Mr. Benson Luke. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. With the RFE scheme, we have now some implementation details. It will involve some engineers, and that will be essentially growing a bigger pie. If it can be a measure to facilitate businesses and expedite processing, I will definitely support that. But I do have some concerns. I think for the scheme in particular, we need to know how many fire engineers there will be in the first place. Does the administration have any estimations? I understand that during consultations you have already been communicating with the sector, so you should have some estimates. Second, you are planning to introduce this bill in the middle of this year. When do you actually plan to implement the scheme? Third, according to your projections, how much workload can the registered fire engineer shoulder? So say in the food business, if they submit applications, how much shorter will it be, the process? And how much public money can we save? Thank you. Deputy Secretary or Undersecretary. In the first phase, we right now deal with 2,400 to 2,500 applications for the licensed premises. So that is approximately 75% of all the applications we deal with at the moment. We already have some 200 professionals that should be able to qualify as fire engineers. And for each class, we would have at least 2,000 people, especially for ventilating systems. So we have a great pool at the moment. We believe it will not be a problem with shortage. As for when we're going to implement the scheme, subject to the passage of the bill, we are planning to implement the scheme earliest in the 4th quarter of this year, latest the 1st quarter of next year. With this scheme, it's not just about lightening the workload of the government. We will still need to make sure we are regulating the work in terms of vetting. So if we have every application submitted by engineers, we will just save workload in terms of not having to conduct inspections. And we also need to conduct inspections of at least 75% of the application. So the workload we can save is basically just 25% of the inspections. The rest would still require inspections by the Fire Services Department. Thank you. All right, thank you, Professor Chairman Kong. Thank you. I support the implementation of the scheme. We have 9,600 buildings that are 50 years old or above, and we are seeing many more age buildings. The pace is very quick. So the issue I see is that you would require someone who has a bachelor's degree or above, as well as 6 years of experience. It shouldn't be that easy. So you're requiring people to have an engineering background, or perhaps you may even require them to have experience in fire engineering. It's a high entry threshold. So I would suggest you to consider other areas, say nurses and social workers. So for nurses, once they have registered, they will accumulate experience and then they will become registered nurses. For social workers, there are different tiers. There are social work assistants and then there are actual social workers. So would you consider for fire engineers, you will have a secondary tier, say assistant engineers, so that you would have a career path? Because without a career path, it may be hard to make sure we have enough people in the first place. So I urge you to look to other professional sectors to implement a career path. Also, I want to ask if the administration will work with self-financing institutions to provide training for parents. If they're aware of such good career prospects, they would encourage their children to take up such training courses. With the RFEs, they need to make sure there is compliance with the fire safety standards. My concern is not exactly about there is an oversupply of such professionals. I'm actually worried about a shortage of such professionals. We may have a great demand for such services in future because we are trying to redevelop the older buildings and we are conducting inspections with fire safety orders. So how can we prevent people from charging exorbitant fees or even engaging in illegal conduct? Thank you. Undersecretary. We are focusing on licensed premises at the moment. We would require the professionals to conduct inspections and making sure the premises comply with the relevant standards, and we will make sure they conform to the stringent standards. As for a study path or a career path, the 6 years experience requirement would be on a case-to-case basis. But let me say this, even for registered professional engineers, they would need say 6 to 7 years of experience to be registered professional engineers. So we're trying to provide a path for one to qualify not only as a registered professional engineer as well as a registered fire engineer. We would require the RFEs to sign off on some certificates. So this is a high bar. So we do not plan on implementing a secondary tier for, say, assistant engineers. But we do understand that there are some lesser positions in the sector already. We also see some established courses. We know that there are 2 institutions that will be providing relevant training courses starting from September of this year. As for prevention of abuse, we do attach great importance to that. So we have a vetting process and we also have a 75% audit requirement. Basically, we will conduct inspections ourselves even if we already had RFEs conduct inspections. We would also make amendments to the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance to treat these individuals or professionals essentially as public servants. That should ensure the healthy development of the sector. Thank you. Mr. Holden Chow. Before, when we were working in districts, we have often had food business holders, license holders comment on the fact that it would take long for applications to be vetted. I believe the proposed implementation of the scheme would be some good news for these holders because that would make things more efficient. So I welcome the proposed implementation of the scheme, specifically the arrangements. You talked about that there would be at least 2,000 people who would qualify to be fire engineers, registered fire engineers. So if they can do some of the work that the FSD is doing in terms of conducting inspections, I believe it will make the process a little faster. Does the administration have any estimates in terms of percentages with the inspections of ventilating systems or fire services installations? How much faster it will be in a percentage? If you have such figures, can you share them with us? With RFEs, they would have to sign off on certificates. As professionals, we're well aware of this, and as a lawyer myself, we would definitely need insurance, specifically professional insurance. Without insurance, it may not provide adequate protection for the professionals. So, has the administration considered for these professionals there will be a mechanism put in place to make sure there is insurance for these professionals? My third and last question is this. So for those who have the relevant qualifications and 6 years of experiences, if for most trades, for apprentices, they would need to accumulate 15 years of experience in order to be qualified. So have you communicated with the sector that for apprentices with 15 years of experience, they may actually even do better than those with bachelor's degree or above qualifications that have 6 years of experiences? So would you consider implementing a pathway for them too? Thank you. Undersecretary, for inspections to be done, it is about conducting risk assessments and issuing instructions if necessary, and then there will be the vetting inspection. Let me first talk about the work of the FSD. We actually have a performance pledge for the FSD. It would in general take 17 days to complete the process with the performance pledge. On average, it would take 10 days for one to arrange for an inspection, and then we would issue instructions if necessary, and then we will conduct a checking inspection. If we are talking about fire service installations, it would be 7 days, and for ventilating systems, it would be 10 days, and then it would take 7 days for the last final inspection to be completed. So in general, it would take 31 to 40 odd days to complete. So say for a fast food shop of approximately 250 square feet, it will take not long to complete the process, and we have pledged to complete the checking within 1 working day, and it is believed that it would take another 4 to 5 working days to conduct inspections, and we do not have to have these holders wait for our final inspection because they can already operate with the confirmation. So it will shorten the process to approximately a week. Thank you. Sorry, I know I've gone past the time limit, but can the administration provide answers to my second and third questions? All right, please. Thank you. We actually have similar demand from the sector, and we have existing legislation that would require apprentices to accumulate 15 years of experience. But we want to retain our requirements because we want to maintain the professional standards to be complied with. As for insurance, if there is more demand, one can always take out insurance in their professional areas. And I believe when necessary, there can always be unions or associations set up, and they will be striving for the benefit of their members. And I believe that is the approach that we will take. All right, I think maybe the insurance companies can think about whether to provide such products in future. Mr. Yang Wen-kit.
消防工程
there are various license applications that require the services from the Fire Service Department. With the RFE scheme, these applications can be expedited. The scheme may seem comprehensive, but I'd like to know more about the qualifications or eligibility criteria. For fire service installation engineer, we only require that they have a bachelor degree. Why don't we include electrical engineers under this scheme? For RFE fire service installation, why don't we include electronic or electrical engineers? Because there are a lot of renewal buildings that require inspection very soon. We don't have enough contractors on the market. Why don't we include electrical engineers to increase the number of contractors we have on the market in order to solve this problem of shortage of manpower in the market? Thank you. Undersecretary, thank you. Well, qualified electrical engineers, if they are registered professional engineers, they can become a RFE. Well, engineers and contractors are two different concepts. Contractors are here to fulfill the fire safety requirements, but for fire engineers, we are talking about those making the assessment and those who formulate the fire safety requirements. We believe that there are enough contractors on the market. Madam Chair, I'd like to follow up. One of the qualifications of contractors is that they have to hire people holding bachelor's or higher degree relevant to the duties of the 3 RFE classes. In the future, we're going to have RFE. Although you say there are enough contractors on the market, with so many defaulted works to be carried out in the future, we are going to need more contractors because there are more and more fire safety directions to be issued. If we have more contractors and if we relax the eligibility criteria, that would facilitate the compliance of fire safety requirements. Do you understand, Undersecretary? That is, to allow registered engineer to join the contractors. One of the requirements of contractors is that they have to hire an electrical engineer. With the scheme, apart from holding a bachelor's or higher degree, shouldn't we include also fire engineers as a contractors? I think what you mean is whether we can relax the requirements on contractors. Well, registered fire engineers must be a professional engineer in the first place. We don't want to add any additional restrictions to contractors. We're talking about engineers who assess the compliance of the requirements. The engineers are not asked to work on the installations. If there is conflict of interest, we won't allow the engineer to vet the compliance. We won't allow the contractors who win the bid to assess the installations or inspections. I think that the Undersecretary have misunderstood my question. I will explain to him after the meeting. Thank you. Mr. Chan Pui-lan. Thank you. The Undersecretary just talked about manpower on the market. He said that there are 200 engineers that are qualified for risk assessment. For FSI and VS, there are 2,000 engineers that are capable. So it seems that there are 4,000 qualified persons on the market. Because only after risk assessment can we install installations and ventilation systems. Is there a plan for us to increase the manpower for risk assessment? Because it's not as useful, even though we may have more people qualified for FSI and VS if you don't have enough people to conduct risk assessment. Just now, the Undersecretary said that they can reply on whether the fire safety requirements are up to par within 1 day. But the number of applications for vetting may increase in the future. So will a bottleneck be formed? Although you say that you pledge to vet the requirements within 1 day, it's possible that you may not be able to meet the pledge. You said that you will set up a registration mechanism. There will be a committee, interview board. A lot of manpower is involved. So I wonder if there is enough manpower in the fire services department to take out these job duties so that you don't have to expand your establishment. Thank you. Undersecretary. There are 190 qualified persons to conduct risk assessment, and the figure is as at January 2025. We believe that there will be more qualified persons for risk assessment in the future. There are relevant training courses offered by universities. We estimate that we will carry out 2,500 risk assessments in the first year. Every month, on average, we believe that some 20 risk assessments will be carried out. As we have 190 qualified persons on the market for 20 risk assessment, we believe that that's enough. As for our manpower, well, we conduct these 2,500 risk assessments every year by ourselves anyway. So we believe that we'll be able to handle the workload. We will not increase our establishment. We will redeploy our internal manpower resources to handle the scheme because, as we said, we can save some 30% of manpower because we will only perform audit inspections of only 70% of the certification completed by RFE. Dr. Zhang Ling, thank you. I support the scheme. This is a scheme to facilitate the people and the trade. I have a few questions. The Undersecretary said that they have consulted the trade, and most of them supported it. It seems that some stakeholders don't support the scheme. I wonder what their views are. Why don't all stakeholders support it? Second, on the qualifications of the fire engineers. Will you ask these fire engineers to undergo examination or training every year to make sure that they can keep abreast of the latest regulations and ordinance? Third, even with the scheme, the FSD will continue to provide certification and risk assessment services. Have you assessed the fee level of these fire engineers? How will you strike a balance? Because the FSD is going to continue to provide such services. Most stakeholders support the scheme. A minority of the stakeholders ask us to relax the eligibility criteria for fire engineers. But as fire hazard is involved, and as Hong Kong is a densely populated city, we uphold our eligibility criteria. There are no other major views from the stakeholders. After a person's become a registered fire engineer, we don't have continuing education requirements. But as most registered engineers are members of institutions or professional institutes, even if they forget to pay their annual fees, they would be disqualified. So the control is stringent enough. As for the fee level, we have talked to the trade. For a restaurant of 250 square feet, they need to spend some $100,000 to complete the assessment and comply with the requirements. For FSD, we offer such services for $4,000. For restaurants with ample time, they can opt for services offered by the FSD. But for restaurant owners that are more superstitious, they may go for services in the private market. We don't have any plan to adjust the fee that we offer because we only we charge fees based on cost recovery principle. Thank you. Next, Dr. Loy Kwok. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not a member of the panel. I thank you for allowing me to speak today. I come here to join this discussion because I fully support the registered fire engineer scheme. In 2017 March, the LegCo passed the Fire Services Amendment Ordinance 2017. This has laid an important foundation for the legislative work in respect of the scheme. I was the chairman of the Bills Committee back then, so I am fully aware of the details of the scheme. I think pretty much everything has been covered in the discussion back in 2017, such as how the engineers should be registered, as well as the codes of practice and guidelines. We discussed all of these in the Bills Committee meeting. But we only passed a framework in 2017, and we need subsidiary legislation to implement the scheme. In 2017, it was said that the framework would be established very soon and the subsidiary legislation would be implemented. But now they have not been implemented yet. But I'm still happy to see all these details being formulated. As for eligibility criteria of a fire engineer, some practitioners have become registered professional engineer, and they would be qualified for or to become registered fire engineers. For practitioners with direct professional experience of 1 year, they would be qualified. If you are a professional engineer in the fire industry, then you would have worked in the trade for more than 1 year. When we discussed the framework of the scheme, there were people from surveying sector ask if they can become registered fire engineer if they undergo relevant training. And it is set out in the paper that it's possible, and as long as they have 6 years relevant working experience, those with a surveying background can become registered fire engineer. There were people who have more than 15 years of relevant working experience, have completed recognized professional courses, they can also become registered fire engineer. I support all of these. I believe that by the time we scrutinize the bill, we will discuss all of these things further. On the point about code of practice and guidelines, I believe that there should be quality control and an appeal mechanism. We will discuss it further when we scrutinize the bill. I'd like to express interest in joining the Bills Committee. Thank you.
有冇簡單？
And the Secretary, would you like to respond briefly to the comments given by Dr. Lo Wai Kwok? First of all, I would like to explain why we took much time to implement the fire engineer scheme. We have seen in 2017 a huge fire broke out in the UK, and one of the major reasons was with third-party certification. That's why we would like to refer to the relevant investigation reports when we determine how to implement our scheme. But we hope to catch up with lost time, and we hope to complete the legislative process this year. As for the appeal mechanism or the regulation of conduct of professionals, these will all be covered in the bill, and we should talk about the details in due course. Thank you. Mr. Martin Liao, it has been 8 years since the bill was passed. I think we should implement, and I support the implementation arrangements proposed by the administration. I have 2 questions, however. So for RFEs who have been confirmed to have breached some code, the disciplinary board may reprimand the RFE or deregister the RFE. So I want to ask if the misconduct will be recorded, and that potential applicants of the fire engineering services will be aware of such. Also, there should be a mechanism for the RFEs who have been deregistered to re-register. What is the mechanism? We have many H buildings in Hong Kong. The FSD will have a team to proactively inspect H buildings for fire safety hazards. So will you expand the scope of fire engineers so that they can perform building inspection services, especially in H buildings? So that should enhance efficiency in inspections in H buildings. Thank you. Thank you. If the RFEs have had certain misconduct or potential misconduct, there will be disciplinary hearings held, and there will be penalties, and these penalties will be gazetted. And if necessary, one can refer to the gazettal notices. And worse comes to worse, one may be deregistered. And they would have to re-register based on the statutory mechanism. This will be in legislation? Yes. Right now, in the first phase, we will target the licensed premises. We would have to review the progress before we determine the way forward for the second phase. But then we will still focus on licensed premises, I believe, in the second phase. because with licensed premises, they are already regulated and their fire safety hazards can be controlled to a certain extent. For buildings, however, as I said earlier, the UK fire, one of the problems or one of the major reasons for the fire was with third-party certification. So that can be quite dangerous, we believe. So right now we want to focus on licensed premises. Thank you. Mr. Ted Ka-piu. I think privatization is almost always the way to go if we are trying to enhancing efficiency. I do support this approach because, after all, we would offer an alternative for people. But I need to ask, is the policy intent only to provide an alternative, or is it the case that in future we will have the direction move to the fire services department only providing enforcement functions instead of inspections? Well, the cost is very high, so it will cost approximately 100,000 odd to engage a private contractor to complete these inspections, but the inspection or the application may not be approved by the fire services department, and in the end they would have to still go to the fire services department, and that would be a significant cost for these holders. Also, I want to ask, so in future, with FSD granted applications and the ones that are done by professionals, would there be a difference in the frequency of inspections to be conducted in future by the Fire Services Department? Undersecretary, we do not want to have professionals replace the functions of the FSD. It is just an alternative. This is the policy intent. As for risk assessments and fire services installations, if we have a third party engaged, the fire safety application will come to the fire services department, and we will just tell them they do not conform to the relevant standards, or if they're doing too many unnecessary works, we will also make it clear. As for the final inspections, and if we do not approve the applications, we will definitely issue instructions. And for the fire engineers, they have resubmitted their applications. We would definitely include these as high-risk cases, and we will conduct audit inspections on such. So we think with the alternative provided by RFEs, it would definitely be because of a time concern on the holder's part instead of a monetary concern. And with other the inspections to be conducted in food business premises, such as those with open fire or whatnot, or naked flames, it will be a focus that we will adopt a risk-based approach, and we will implement a trust-based approach. We would just look at the certifications for the relevant documents when we fed the applications, if they're outside of the 25%. But if something happens, we will make sure we will conduct audit inspections on the application submitted by the professional in future. Thank you. Mr. Lei Chen Kang. Sorry, the microphone was not on. All right, thank you, Chair. I do have some questions on the actual operations. Once we implement the RFE scheme, we will have the business operators that may opt for the services of the professionals, or they can still go to the FSD for services. In the end, they would need a license to be granted by the FSD in order to operate. So with renewals of licenses, does one have to go through the whole process again? What is the existing practice? So is it that you want to ask this question before you ask the other questions? That you want an answer to this question before you ask the other questions? Yes. Thank you. Undersecretary, with renewals, the food businesses would just submit the plans to us. If there are no changes made, we would in general grant the application without further requirements. I think sometimes the problem lies with transfers of premises or reassignments of premises. So say for a certain premises in a football stadium, if they change the layout, they would need to submit an application. It is often the case that while they have changed the layout, but the area has not changed, their applications would be rejected. So is it the case that with the risk-based approach, it should be the case that they should have their licenses renewed without a problem? Or would it be easier if they go straight to the FSD? I don't think it is the case, because even for the RFEs, they would need to make sure they conform to the relevant standards. And with assignments or reassignments of the premises, they would have to make sure that they go through the whole process, because we would treat these as new applications. They need to make sure they have the necessary fire services installations. So it may be faster, but it does not mean we would have less stringent requirements. We will not lower the standards because one has engaged an RFE. That will not happen. If the relevant standards are not complied with, the RFE will be subject to disciplinary hearings. If there is corruption, there may be other offenses as well. So we are not compromising on the standards. It will not be easier if one goes to an RFE for the certification. Thank you. Chair, I would just like to express my support for the proposed implementation arrangements. Again, I think we need to uphold the standards because a fire hazard is always quite dangerous. Alright, I understand that the same standards will be upheld. It's just that it may be faster. Thank you. Mr. Andrew Lam, I definitely welcome this because this has been long in the making, and the sector definitely looks forward to it. I think this is quite comprehensive, the proposed implementation arrangements, but I do have some concerns from a user perspective. There are numerous consultants already in the trade, but they may not be able to fit the eligibility criteria. There are 3 classes, so it may be confusing for citizens to see which individuals or which professionals qualify for a certain class. I understand that you wouldn't call the consulting companies illegal But then with the intermediaries, they can often miss something, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So how can we make sure the information is clear for the public to select the right people? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Because I know that there are often different messages or confusing messages on the market that confuses the users, and the FSD has set up a dedicated office to cope with the issue. We will be mindful of this issue when we implement the scheme. On top of gazetting the list of RFEs, we will also upload the list on our website. Some users may engage consultant to offer one-stop services. The users can also request the list of RFE from the consultant. We try to make everything transparent so that users know what their rights are. I have a follow-up question. I know that we're talking about business here. I hope that when there is referral services, the administration will set out the responsibilities of the consultants clearly. There could be middlemen and consultant involved in a REX project. We will talk to the trade to see if we can add additional clauses in the code of practice and guidelines to deal with the issue of agencies or middlemen. It's 4:16 p.m. and we have to hand the conference room over to the next panel at 4:30 p.m. Please observe the time limit. Mr. Dennis LEUNG. Thank you. After listening to so many questions, I recall some of the previous cases that have happened. This may not be entirely relevant to the scheme. I am worried about controversies that may arise upon implementation of the scheme. The Fire Services Ordinance has been amended multiple times. When I was a Ka-piu district councillor, there was a project of the housing department that was handed over to the WSD, the social welfare department, to turn it into a rehabilitation center. And during the construction period that lasted 3 to 4 years, the Fire Services Ordinance was amended. Because the ordinance was amended in the middle of the construction, there were certain issues with the compliance. Also, there were works relating to solar panels on rooftops. During the construction period, there was no issue, but as the ordinance was amended in the meantime, the means of escape was expanded under the regulation, and the works project was paused because of the amendments. I'm worried about disputes that may arise, because when a works project starts, all the regulations may be complied with, but then after the ordinance is amended later on, then there could be problems. How is the administration going to protect the rights of the consumers? For NGOs, schools, they could come across similar issues as well. Thank you. The administration, please. There are different licensed premises that are subject to certification. I need to look into the issue raised by the member later on. I know that you're referring to new construction works project. For new projects, we subject these buildings to the prevailing regulations at the time when the work started. I'm not sure about the cases mentioned by Mr. Dennis LEUNG. At the initial stage, we try to include only food businesses in the scheme. Only when the FSD approved of the fire safety requirements can the contractor start working on the installations and other ventilation systems services. So nothing will change in the course of the works unless the users or licensed premises changed their layout. Some works project may seek funding from the electrical or the government. Usually at the end stage of the project, if the fire safety requirements cannot be met, additional funding may be required. How do we minimize disputes? Undersecretary, please talk to the member after the meeting. I think that this is a rather special case. We'll handle it later on. Next, Mr. Lam San-kan. I left the meeting room for some time, so I may have repeated some of the questions that have already been put. With more and more regulations, the society may become more efficient, so I definitely support the scheme. There are a lot of consultants on the market. Will a lot of people register to become RFE? Will we offer training to encourage registration? Because with registration, it's easier for us to regulate, and they will be more skillful in complying with the regulations. And in turn, it will make our approval process quicker. So I think that training is very important. Thank you. Undersecretary, thank you for the question. On the point about registration, I know that the trade supports the mechanism because currently we don't have a registration mechanism of fire engineers. And now we are proposing a registered fire engineer scheme, so the trade supports it. At least one tertiary institutions are offering bachelor degrees in fire engineering. And there are 2 tertiary institutions that are planning to create courses or degrees in fire engineering. As long as people hold a top-up degree in relevant fields, they can be registered as a RFE. So I think that demand will grow in this area. Next, Mr. Ma Feng-kwok. Thank you. I'm not sure if my question's been put. I understand that you're offering an option for the premises. From your perspective, if the premises opt for registered fire engineers, what is the advantage? Can they save time? Can they save money? Will the requirements be the same, regardless of which kind of service the users choose? How do practitioners accumulate work experience in order to become eligible? Do we take into account the number of cases they've handled or the number of working hours? Or do practitioners have to undergo examination in order to become a registered fire engineer? Well, the administration said that For a food business of 250 square meters, then the fee charged by FSD is $4,000. For RFEs, they charge about $100,000. Time can be saved. What about the second question? To become a registered fire engineer, well, there are 3 classes of such engineers. And there are 3 tiers of eligibility criteria. The practitioner should either be a registered professional engineer with 1 year working experience, or he should have a bachelor's degree or higher degree in relevant duties or fields. For those with only a bachelor or higher degree without registration with the institutes, they should have 6 years of working experience. To become a registered professional engineer, one should have at least 7 years of working experience. For people, practitioner without academic qualifications in the field, they should possess at least 15 years of relevant working experience in order to become eligible. We have made reference to the registration of other fields of engineer in Hong Kong. We don't have another tier other than registered fire engineer. I'm concerned about the third-party certification issue. The Undersecretary mentioned about the 2017 UK incident. There is a gatekeeping element under the scheme. That is, when the RFE formulate the fire safety requirements, the FSD is the one to endorse such requirements. Do the RFE have to submit fire safety requirements formulated to FSD on each case? Well, I know that there is a flow chart. I hope that when the subsidiary legislation is enacted, when we have the option of RFE, you would formulate another flow chart for the trade or members of the public. You just have to answer my first question. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. As a registered fire engineer, well, a practitioner only needs to register 1 time. When an RFE is engaged to certify a premises, then the engineer have to inspect the premises and offer recommendations on fire safety requirements. Say, for example, if fire hose should be installed, so on and so forth. They should also make recommendations on ventilation systems and fire services installations. If you want to acquire food business and obtain the fire services certification, you need to comply with all these requirements, and these requirements need to be endorsed by the FSD. So all of the requirements need to be endorsed by the FSD on a case-by-case basis. I hope that we can implement the scheme well so that we can facilitate the people and the trade and to safeguard the safety of the people. That concludes this item. Last item, any other business? There being no AOB, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
咁我宣布會議
Meeting adjourned.